Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Matteo Spagnolo. Remember him? Let's check in on how the Timberwolves draft and stash players doing overseas. A couple of big lines he's put up recently. Also, check in on the Western Conference. Karl-Anthony Towns' return to practice continues. And also, Wolves-Hawks Monday night. We'll preview that matchup. We haven't seen Atlanta yet this year. So we'll talk about all that on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Monday. Everybody happy. Timberwolves game day. The Wolves take on the Hawks in Atlanta. The first time we've seen the Hawks this year. That's tonight after the Wolves got the weekend off. So we'll preview that matchup later in the show. Plenty to get to before that, though, as well. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow this show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and my account, which is at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, let's start here today. I want to get to Matteo Spagnolo here in a little bit. I also want to get to Wolves-Hawks, but let's start with the Karl-Anthony Towns return to practice, which continues, and also the Western Conference, how it sets up now after a weekend of games. First, the Towns stuff. So Karl-Anthony Towns practiced again. Remember, we talked last week about how he showed up, or I guess it was technically 2-on-0 work that he did after practice Wednesday. He, continues to be around the team. And then he actually posted on his Snapchat, Towns did, video of him going one-on-one against, I think it was a staffer. But it actually showed some pretty good movement for Towns. He gets the ball in the, this is ridiculous that we're like, that I'm overanalyzing. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you might have watched this video, done the same thing. Analyze what Towns movement looks like. Now, this is a clip that he posted on his Snapchat. So, if there was any thought at all put into that, it like he knew what he was doing, right? But the clip is him taking the ball kind of basically extended from the elbow, pump faking, going to his right, spinning back to his left, up and under move. Lots of movement put on that left calf, right? Like it looks good. Like he's pushing off of it. Initially when he pump fakes, he comes off of it. Then he pivots on his right foot, goes up with his left foot on the up and under move to lay it in. So that he's putting a lot of, normal stress on that left leg. And clearly that's a part of the recovery, right? Because we talked about the other day, the concerns that Doogie Wolfson talked about on his, the Scoop podcast a couple of weeks ago now, maybe even 3 weeks ago, that Towns camp, his agent, etc., has some concern about the possibility for an overcompensation injury, right? Which is what happened to Kevin Durant back in 2020. He came back too soon in the playoffs from the calf strain. He ends up tearing his Achilles. Those are, that was a possibility when the Towns injury happened, right? That would have been obviously worst case scenario. It's kind of what it looked like live. Like that night when I did the podcast after Towns strained his calf in late November, I was very worried that the injury was an Achilles injury, right? That's what it looked like. Those are very close muscles, and those injuries can lead to, the calf injury, compensating for that could help lead to a more devastating injury like an Achilles, which of course at that point would put him out through next season almost certainly. So understandable that Towns would want to be extremely careful with his return. Obviously the team would want to be careful with his return as well. You've got to put him through all this stuff to make sure that, and I'm sure, I don't know this, but the Wolves have to have the biomechanics folks and like whoever else watching his body movements, measuring his body movements, making sure that he's not putting unnecessary strain on maybe the other leg or a different part of the leg or, the foot, the Achilles area, because he perhaps is nervous or compensating for the calf strain, right? So all those things have to be considered. This clip, he obviously looks great. This isn't 5-on-5, but it's 1-on-1. And Finch said earlier in the week, he'd play 2-on-0. He'd progress to playing 5-on-0. 1-on-1 is more intensive than 5-on-0, right? You've got somebody putting pressure on you. The defender's got his hand on you. You've got somebody forcing you to change your movements. 5-on-0, you can do anything you want, and you're going through the motions, but you're not having to go against the force of a defender or having to counter a defender's movements, right? So this is a step beyond that. 2-on-0, 5-on-0, 1-on-1. Now what's next? Is he going to play some 2-on-2 or 3-on-3? Or but the Wolves are, of course, they had Saturday, Sunday off. The video that he posted, I think it was during the day Saturday. So they travel to Atlanta. Towns is listed as out on the injury report. So we're not going to see Karl-Anthony Towns play in Atlanta. I don't think anyone thought that was going to happen. Not sure if he traveled with the team or not. He was on the last road trip, which was a long one. This is only a 1-game road trip. So if he, for some reason, didn't travel, don't read too much into that. This is a 1-game trip. So it's certainly possible he just doesn't make the trip. Because it's just the 1 game. And then they come back home and, he's practicing with the team, right? So I think we're to the point where we can almost start, like, it'd be good to get confirmation that he's going, he's playing 5-on-5, right? But I don't think we're too far off from potentially seeing Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor in a game. And again, this is just based on the fact that we know he's practicing. Looking at the schedule, they're at Atlanta Monday, back home for a 1-game homestand Wednesday against the Celtics. It wouldn't shock me if the Wolves waited till a road game to bring him back. Perhaps it's Friday night at Chicago. Initially, at the All-Star break, I was projecting maybe it would be this game against Atlanta. I might not be too far off here. It wouldn't shock me if it's Friday at Chicago. Maybe it's Saturday at Toronto. You give him the extra day. You could play him Saturday in Chicago, Friday at Chicago, but then you'd give him the Saturday night off and he'd miss the Saturday game. At that point, you probably sit him through Friday, have him play Saturday on the second night of a back-to-back at Toronto. Then he gets the Sunday off day before he plays Monday at New York. Then you get an Atlanta game 2 days after that, and then 2 more off days. So you go game, off day, game, off day, game, off day, game. Yeah, game, off day, game, off day, game, 2 off days. And you wouldn't have to worry about a back-to-back in there. You give him this full week, to get back into shape still. So this is just me completely speculating based on what I think makes sense, looking at the schedule and what we know, which is very little about Towns' recovery and practice, et cetera, this week. I would be circling in pencil Saturday at Toronto based on the upcoming schedule. That's just my speculation. I want to be really clear about that. But that would seem about right to me. Speaking of the schedule and the Western Conference, after a weekend of play, so I'm actually recording this. The Lakers are currently playing in a close game in the fourth quarter against the Knicks on Sunday night. So the Lakers game is not over yet. We don't know what the outcome of that is. If they win, which is entirely possible, it's a close game. If the Lakers win, the Lakers, Timberwolves, and Mavericks will all be tied with the same record in 7, 8, and 9 in the West. The Wolves already have the tiebreaker against both Dallas and the Lakers. So the Wolves will have the same record, 34-34, if the Lakers win. But no matter what happens in that Lakers game, the Wolves officially will be in 7th in the West. The Mavs will be in 8th. The Lakers will be in 9th. Okay? The Jazz are only a game behind that in 10th place. Both the Jazz and Pelicans, the Pelicans and Thunder both won. The Pelicans, Thunder, and Jazz all have the same record too. This is crazy. So if the Lakers win, you'll have 3 teams at 34-34, the Wolves, Mavs, and Lakers. 3 teams at 33-35, the Jazz, Pelicans, and Thunder. And that's your 7 through 11 in the West. The Warriors are 1 game better than the Wolves, Mavs, and Lakers. 1 game better. And that potential tiebreaker is still kind of hanging in the balance, right? The Wolves do have it over the Clippers. They're now a game and a half behind the Clippers, who have won 3 straight. They've kind of figured it out here over the last week. But all that to say, the 4th and the Suns, that's, 3.5 games away. That's unlikely. But 5th and 6th seeds are still very much in play for the Wolves. And they do have the tiebreakers against the Mavs, Lakers, and actually the Jazz too. So the Wolves are in a pretty good spot. But again, this is another one at Atlanta. You got to have this one. You got to have it. You can't overlook it as a 1-game road trip, which can happen sometimes, right? That it's very easy to just kind of be like, all right, we'll be back on Wednesday. This is just a 1-game trip. You got to lock in. You got to play a team with the new coach, or new to them head coach in Quinn Snyder. Actually, let's do that next. Let's talk about that matchup next, and then we'll get to Matteo Spagnolo here at the end of the show and what he's been up to overseas. So we'll do Wolves-Hawks preview here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Prize Picks. On Monday night against the Atlanta Hawks, I would take I would take Rudy Gobert over on rebounds. I mean, the Hawks obviously have Clint Capella. We'll talk more about that matchup here in a minute. But I think Gobert is going to have a good rebounding game, and the Hawks are a pretty mediocre rebounding team overall. I think Gobert will have a good game. So I'd take rebounds over at Prize Picks for Rudy Gobert on Monday against the Hawks. If you're not familiar and you're wondering how it works, it's really easy. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes the NBA, the NFL, obviously MLB, which is upcoming, NHL, which is ongoing, college sports, of course, big college basketball this week. Selection Sunday was yesterday. You can make your entry in less than 60 seconds. It really is that easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. All right, let's talk about the Wolves-Hawks matchup here. And then we'll get to Spagnolo here later. But let's talk Wolves-Hawks. So this is actually the first time the Wolves have seen Atlanta this year, which is very, very unusual. There's only a month left in the season, not even quite a month. So the Wolves actually get the Hawks now twice in the next 9 days or something like that. Atlanta, the Cliff Notes, obviously they fired their head coach, Nate McMillan, not that long ago, a couple of weeks ago. They've now had Quinn Snyder for the last 7 games. He's gone 3-4 under the interim Joe Prunty, who is also incidentally the last Milwaukee Bucks interim prior to Budenholzer being head coach there. But the Hawks have now, since they fired the head coach, collectively gone 5-4 between Prunty and Snyder, 3-4 specifically under Snyder. So some of these season-long stats, they shift a little, obviously, right? They're going to have a different approach with the new head coach. But for the season, they've been a good offensive team and a really bad defensive team. Actually kind of the flip of the Wolves. Like they've been a top 10 offensive team for basically all season and a bottom 10 defensive team. The Wolves have been they've kind of hovered 10 to 15 defensively. Currently they're 10th in defensive rating, at least at Basketball Reference. And the Wolves are bottom 10 in offensive rating. The Hawks are bottom 10 in defensive rating. Offensively, it's kind of a weird formula for Atlanta, and the Trae Young teams have kind of always been that way. The Hawks are 29th in three-point rate. Only one team attempts less three-pointers in terms of percentage of their shots, right? They're 28th in attempts per game, 29th in attempt rate because they play at a top 10 pace as well. They're also 28th in free throw rate. So they're 28th in free throw rate, 29th in three-point attempt rate. They're 19th in three-point percentage, but they're first in two-point attempts per game because they play at a fast pace. They shoot a lot of twos. They're 16th in two-point percentage. So they shoot twos well. They shoot a ton of twos. They don't get to the line often, but when they get there, they're 4th in free throw percentage. They make a lot of free throws. Trae Young attempts 8.6 free throws per game. Nobody else on the Hawks attempts more than 2.5 free throws a game. DeJounte Murray attempts 2.4 per game. Onyeka Okongwu attempts 2.2 per game, but the only player that attempts more than 2.5 per game, John Collins also attempts 2.4 per game, is I missed DeAndre Hunter. DeAndre Hunter attempts 3.3 a game. So Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter are the only guys that attempt more than 2.5 free throws per game for the Hawks. They all shoot it well, though. Like everyone that gets to the line for them is shooting 80% or greater individually. The only one who isn't a good free throw shooter is Clint Capella. Everybody else is good, essentially. So obviously you're worried about Trae Young. The Hawks basically go how Trae Young and Clint Capella go. And they've both been okay this year. I mean, Trae Young wasn't an all-star after making it 2 of the last 3 seasons. Clint Capella has had a good season. He's a really good player. But they go how Trae Young and Clint Capella go. DeJounte Murray has had a really disappointing season after coming over from San Antonio, excuse me. Remember, the Wolves were rumored to be very interested in DeJounte Murray before he was traded to Atlanta, and then the Wolves ultimately, of course, landed Rudy Gobert. But Murray, after being an all-star last season, an injury replacement, albeit with San Antonio, has really taken a dip this year. A lot of that is due, the defense hasn't been as good, and individual defensive metrics can be pretty noisy. So it's not entirely his fault that the metrics look the way that they do, but the, you know, the metrics hate what he's done defensively this season compared to last year. Still okay-ish, but it just hasn't been the same. Also, offensively, he's not initiating offense in Atlanta like he was in San Antonio. I mean, last year with the Spurs, he had an assist rate over 40%. The San Antonio Spurs, 40.6%. And this season, 24% with the Hawks. With Trae Young on the team, DeJounte Murray's playing off the ball far more often. He's shooting more threes in terms of, what? And really, no matter how you slice it, right? He's attempting more threes per game. He's attempting more per 100 possession. The rate is up. He's also shooting them better. He's making almost 36%, so about league average, which is up drastically from the last couple of years in San Antonio. He hovered around 32%. But the scoring's down a little. The assists are down a lot. And he's getting to the line less because he's shooting more catch and shoot jumpers, right? He's controlling the ball less. He's initiating less offense. He's getting into the paint less. All that stuff is way down. I mean, if you just want to look at it as per game, like the free throw rate is down per game. He's shooting 1.2 less free throws per game. That's, do the percentage on how he shoots it, 78% for his career from the line. He's losing a point per game at the free throw line. He's gaining some of that back in terms of made threes, but he's also just generally getting to the paint less, getting less scoring opportunities. His rebound numbers are also down too, which is interesting because he's playing off the ball more often. So you would think he'd be in the paint a bit more often, not necessarily offensively, but that he'd be somewhere, near the paint defensively. But his defensive rebound rate, the last 4 years, it was over 20%. He's 14.2% this year. It's a massive dip. So the defense has been worse. He's operating offense. He's initiating offense less. He's getting to the line less. He's rebounding less. The only thing that's better is the number of three-pointers he's taking and the number of three-pointers he's making. So I would say generally, I mean, the Hawks have, of course, been a disappointing team so far this season. Sitting here right now, they fired their head coach. They're 34-34, same record as the Timberwolves. They're likely going to be in the play-in in the East. They're currently 8th in the Eastern Conference, but it's been a disappointing season. And DeJounte Murray has generally been disappointing this year. I would even argue, I mean, I haven't watched a ton of Hawks games, but I mean, in terms of the numbers, what they gave up for him, it's not too different than the Rudy Gobert acquisition for Minnesota in terms of the lack of immediate, tangible on-court impact that we're seeing. Again, defensively, they've been bad as a team, bottom 10. They're a pretty middle of the pack rebounding team. They're bottom 10 in terms of defensive rebound rate. So if you're the Wolves, the keys to this game, have Jaden McDaniels follow Trae Young around the floor, be physical with Clint Capella, try to get him into foul trouble. That's you can do that, right? You can get him into some foul trouble. Although he's a little less foul pro than, say, Okongwu or John Collins, like those guys too. By the way, John Collins' numbers are way down this year, right? And a lot of that's because they have just got more guys that are trying to score, right? They've got more guys with the ball in their hands, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, and then Bogdan. Like there's a lot of guys that are trying to score the basketball in an Atlanta Hawks uniform. And yet their bench has been so weak. I should mention the Saddiq Bey acquisition, which I love for the Atlanta Hawks. Saddiq Bey, I really liked him coming out a couple years ago in the draft. And, he hasn't gotten all the opportunities you'd like to see him get in Detroit. And he was traded for just a couple of second rounders to Atlanta. I like that acquisition. I think he gives them some punch off the bench, which again, otherwise they've had a fairly thin bench this year. There just isn't much to write home about off their bench. But now you get Saddiq Bey. He's had a couple of really nice games. In fact, they just won. They beat the Wizards twice. They lost to Boston on Saturday, but they beat the Wizards Wednesday and Friday. Bey was a big part of that second one. And then the loss to Boston, which was a really high-scoring game on Saturday. He had a big game off the bench for them. I'm going to pull up what his line was, but I know he had 17 points on 6 of 9 shooting, made 4 threes. Bey did in 26 minutes off the bench. It's basically him and Onyeka Okongwu. Like those are the only guys you're really worried about if you're the opponent. So in my mind, it's be physical with Capella, try to get one of the bigs in foul trouble, whether it's Collins or Capella, and just do what you can with Trae Young. Make DeJounte Murray beat you. Make DeAndre Hunter beat you. Put Jaden McDaniels on Trae Young. Now, of course, Trae Young's extremely crafty. He's much craftier than he is. He's not a knockdown three-point shooter. He never really has been. It's more about being crafty with the ball. And Jaden McDaniels can't get drawn into the web. He can't get into foul trouble. He's got to do his best to stay back and not fall for pump fakes, not get drawn into the web is kind of the thing, right? So put McDaniels on Trae Young. hold on for dear life. Rebound the basketball. Don't give them second chance opportunities. They had 13 offensive rebounds against the Celtics. The Hawks are a +8 on the glass. It's in part why they hung in. They were up after the first quarter. They were competitive for most of the game. So keep them off the glass. They're a decent offensive rebounding team. Keep them off the glass. Be physical with Capella. Guard Trae Young as best you can, and make some of those other guys beat you. And the Wolves, this is a very winnable game for Minnesota, of course. And so here's hoping they get it on that one-game road trip. All right, let's close the show by checking in on Matteo Spagnolo, the Timberwolves draft pick this last year, or draft night acquisition actually this last year, and check and see what he's up to overseas. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite Built Bar or Puff. Now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. I don't even know that I could pick one. I'll get back to you on who I'm going to be voting for. But I mean, anything with cookie dough, any of the brownie ones, any of the batter ones, really anything. I also love the granola. I don't know the granola is in the bracket, but anyway. But you'll be voting for whatever your favorite bar is over at Built.com. Support your team, support your bar or Puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or Puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or Puffs delivered monthly straight to your door, which sounds amazing. You have to try Built. Built is the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing that you won't even think that they're good for you. What makes Built bars and Puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or Puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. All right, so this year on draft night, the Timberwolves were they drafted Matteo Spagnolo at 50th overall in the draft. He did come over and play in Summer League. The real quick, I don't want to do the full profile again, but the quick Spagnolo, I guess, bio, if you're not familiar. He is playing for Real Madrid Baloncesto overseas. He is Italian. And basically the profile in Spagnolo is, in my mind, based on the film I watched of him before this season, so I haven't watched much of him this year. I haven't watched any of him actually this year overseas. I think he's a two guard in the NBA. He's 6'5". He's got a 6'8" wingspan, big body. He can get his own shot. He's a good shooter. I think he's a good secondary playmaker. He's played on the ball a lot overseas. Like he's initiated offense for his teams quite a bit, but I like him off the ball as a secondary playmaker. I think he could kind of play the role almost in a sense. I'm not saying that his game is like D'Angelo Russell, but what you would want D'Lo to do if he was playing probably what D'Lo's best cast role is, right? Where you're a secondary playmaker, you can get your own shot, you can knock down shots if you're open. D'Lo's obviously a better shooter than Spagnolo, but I really like the upside for Spagnolo. He was 19 years old coming into the season. I think he's a solid defender. The question is at the NBA level, defensively, is he a good enough athlete to stay in front of guys? But he's big enough, and I think he's got enough lateral quickness. In my mind, if he improves his jumper, I think he could be a nice rotation piece. There's some concerns about shot selection. I think sometimes he got a little shot happy watching some of his games from last year overseas. But given his size, I think he's got a pretty good knack on both sides of the floor in terms of being aggressive, getting into the body defensively, using his big body to make things difficult for the opposing team. I like him as a prospect, and I do think he has a future at the NBA level. I wasn't super impressed with him in Summer League and really limited action, but I don't think he did a whole lot to help his case there. But again, we're talking about a guy that's turning 20 this year. Now, he scored 10 or more points in 7 straight games for his team. He scored 20 or more points in his last 3 games. And this is courtesy of Francesco Semprucci, a co-founder of Stash Draft on Twitter, co-founder of Stash Draft. Francesco Semprucci says he's living at the free throw line, averaging 7.5 free throw attempts in his last 6 games. So his last 3 games, his lines were 23 points, 5 assists, 23 points on 11 shots from the field, 23 points on 13 shots plus 4 assists, and then 20 points on just 8 shots, 7 assists. So in those games, he shot 8 free throws, 6 free throws, 9 free throws. He also made at least 1 3 in each of those games. I mean, you'll take 23 points on 11 shots, 23 points on 13 shots, and 20 points on 8 shots all day long. That's exactly the kind of production the Wolves want to see out of Spagnolo this season. He needs to show that he can have that type of production. Because again, he was 19 when the Timberwolves drafted him. Has he turned 20? Yeah, he just turned 20 in January. So a lot of upside here for this guy. And, TBD, I don't know what his contract looks like. If there's a possibility that he could come back over next year, I'm not sure what that is. That's definitely an offseason, something I want to dig into in the offseason. Overall this year, though, and by the way, I misspoke on which team he's on currently. I said earlier he was on, what did I say he was on? Whatever team I said he was on, I was wrong. He's not currently on Real Madrid. He's on loan to, I'm not going to try and say it because I don't want to mispronounce it. He's on loan to a different team. I'll give it a go. He's on loan to Dolomiti Energia Trento of the Liga Basket Series A currently. And his overall numbers this season in 14 games, again, the last 7, he's been 10 or more points. But overall this season, he's averaging 12.2 points per game. He's shooting 41% from the floor, only 29% from 3. He is getting to the line 4.5 times per game, and the assist rate is decent as well. So he's not shooting the ball as well as you'd like to see. A couple years ago, he shot 44% from 3, but last year just 30%. This year just 29%. So the outside shot needs some work, but he's getting into the paint. He's getting to the line. He's dishing assists for others. He's creating for others, which again, he's kind of that scorer, secondary playmaker type, almost like he might be a 6-man type player at the NBA level. I could see that being his future, where he comes in off the bench and tries to get buckets, but can also create for others. I think that's likely his career at the NBA level, but we'll see. Again, he just turned 20 in January. So we'll be 20 all the way through the middle part of next season. Hopefully we see him at least in Summer League again this summer, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. All right. Again, Wolves-Hawks Monday night. We'll go live for the postcast with Marnie Gellner about 45 minutes after the game. I think it's a 6:30 Central tip. So I don't know, call it 9:30 or so. 9:30-ish, maybe a little later than that, 9:45 Central Time. We'll go live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel with Marnie Gellner from Bally Sports North. And, of course, we post the audio of that right here on this feed, Locked On Wolves. In fact, the last episode before this one was Friday night's postcast after the Wolves lost. So if you haven't listened to that before with Marnie and myself, go check that out. And make sure you subscribe to Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube so you're notified when we go live Monday night and after every Wolves game. Big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can watch on YouTube. You can also listen on whatever your favorite audio platform is. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.